I want you to rank your top 5 or bottom 5, I guess, worst signings of the Pep and Cheeky era. Can we?
Do you want me to go from 5 to 1 so that the worst is the last one that I say?
I think I might. It depends how you've sort of approached this, but I think I've got your bottom 2 to begin with, and I'm gonna say at some point in that, Calvin Phillips appears.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Calvin Phillips is absolute rock bottom for me. I think he's it's such an odd one because on paper it looked like the perfect sort of the perfect not perfect signing, but you know what I mean, the perfect sort of for the position of back up to Rodri. It felt like exactly what we needed. He was homegrown. We'd seen him play in both the national side and also for Leeds, so we'd seen him do really well in like multiple like systems. He played really well as like in a Bielsa system, which, you know, whilst obviously not the same as Pep's, is a fairly similar sort of positional play kind of thing. Yeah, it felt like everything about that should have gone so well. And then it just turns out that he was just he literally I've heard that from people who know people at the club that within 1 or 2 training sessions they were just like, mate, what have we done? Like, who have we signed? Like, it was a case of like it was just a case of, I don't know whether it was just a case of mentally he couldn't quite get up to speed with the tactics very quickly, or if it was a physical thing as well, because he was obviously, we could all see that maybe it was difficult to really tell because of how few games he played, but he definitely wasn't blessed for pace, which obviously is one of the things that Rodri kind of, even though he's not the most pacey player on the pitch, although he can certainly, you know, get over quite a bit of ground, it doesn't matter because his positioning's so good that it rarely matters. Whereas when you don't have that and you also don't have pace, then what? Then, you know, you're kind of missing out on both sides of things. So it's just such a shame because it felt like a signing that really should have worked in a lot of ways. But I think just the stark reality of it is, and whether you know, there'll always be the eternal debate of how much of this was just down to the fact that how can you possibly shine when you play one game every 3 months, and the other side of it is if Pep's seeing that he's so bad in training that he's not worth playing more than once every 3 months. Also, there is the Rodri factor that he was literally a Ballon d'Or winning, you know, a Ballon d'Or winner to be central midfield ahead of him. But yeah, it was just it's just a shame because
can I add another sort of penny in there? Apologies if you've mentioned it already. He did get injured very early on in his City campaign, didn't he? And they said, I believe, was it the Barcelona friendly, which was a little bit more frustrating, but it was a recurring issue with his shoulder and he had to have surgery. And by that point, he was out until I think it was November. He came back, was it the Chelsea League Cup game? And to be fair to him, he came on in that. Chelsea at the time weren't doing anything canny. Pinged a few passes about, looked all right. But then it was the World Cup. And he went off to the World Cup. He came back and I can't remember if Pep used the word overweight or fat or something like that, but he was
I can't remember
like
which one it was, but it was
massively out of shape.
It was definitely overweight.
It wouldn't be surprised, you know, and fair enough, the guy is a genius literally on and off the pitch, but you know, given English is either his second, third, fourth language or whatever, if he just outright said fat, you know, it kind of just because, you know, the bluntness of it, but yeah, I think it was just, it was a shame, a real shame. You know, harking back to the conversation in part 1, nice guys in football, I guess, here do finish last with Southgate not winning a trophy and Calvin Phillips being the worst signing of the Pep era. But
I think as well, the sort of another thing that makes it particularly bad is that he is still on our books, and it's difficult to get, and it's difficult for us to get rid of him. Like, there's some players on this that we'll discuss who have left, and we got kind of like a similar-ish fee for when they joined, or it was just like a very short, it wasn't a long-term deal, so it wasn't that, you know, that bad. But yeah, Calvin Phillips signed, like, was it a 5 or a 6 year deal when he joined, and he still has like 3 years left to go on that. And we're relying on like Leeds to get promoted and just be overcome with nostalgia and just sign him back again. Otherwise, we're going to just loan him out until his contract expires. Like, yeah, we're in a really sort of rough situation when it comes to trying to get rid of him, which again isn't his fault. Like, he's well within his rights to just milk this contract we've given him for as long as he can. But yeah, it just makes the sort of the quality of the signing from a cheeky point of view worse.
Yeah, not a good one. And I think you can probably, at least purely footballing reasons, say that is dead bottom. Do we say his name? Or maybe you've not got him second bottom, but I think you might have got him second bottom.
Second bottom. I have got him second. I actually feel a bit bad that Calvin Phillips is worse than Benjamin Mendy.
Which is why I probably had to make the caveat with it being football reasons. But I guess if you did want to speak about football reasons, you could even say that Benjamin Mendy was another one who was better.
I could have just said obviously Benjamin Mendy because legal reasons, and it's an outright easy number one. But I think in terms of even if we're just looking at a football reason, like 50 million on a guy who played, 5 or 6 games and then did his ACL. Yeah. It wasn't even that, was it? It was like 3 or 4, did his ACL, and then returned from that and did his other ACL, and then returned from that and was probably one of the most diabolical footballers I've ever seen play left back for City, which is a lot. We've had a lot of stinkers at left back in the short time that Pep's been in charge of the club. So I think Mendy, it kind of speaks for itself in a lot of ways, but even on a footballing level, you can very much make the argument that. And I don't know, footballing level, it's not really his fault. Like on a footballing level, like it's doing both your cruciate ligaments over the course of 2 seasons is just bad luck. However, there's a lot about Benjamin Mendy that wasn't bad luck, and we'll probably leave that there. But yeah, I think those 2, whatever order you want to put them in, I think those 2 are like the obvious standouts of worst signings that we've made under Pep's time.
And I'd probably say there's a bit of a chasm between the bottom 2 and the bottom
and the rest,
whatever else. Yeah, because just looking at a list of sort of Pep signings, I've seen a few people sort of pop up on social media with their own lists and stuff, and I'm not naming names, but some of them have had me cracking up, really cracking up, and maybe not for the right reasons.
Did Jack Grealish feature on any of those lists by any chance?
A couple. Yeah, absolutely. But do you want to give me names, or do you fancy a bit of a pool to pick from? I don't know how you kind of want to go about this.
I can give you names if you want.
Should we do that?
I've made a list. Yeah.
Should we do that?
And then we could throw some honourable mentions in afterwards if you think. So my third bottom one, and I feel bad because I really like him, Matheus Nunes. I just think that, and this season, trust me, for this season, he's kind of shown his usefulness a little bit, but I just think as a signing, a deadline day 60 million panic buy when it's just so un-City like, and it's just very like, and last season he did virtually nothing. This season, I think, were it not for injuries and sort of Pep deciding that this is an athletic guy who I can use elsewhere on the pitch, he wouldn't really be playing. I think that really ultimately once you get past those 2, there are no real, for me, major standouts. And I think the transfer fee and like how, because I looked at a list on Transfer Marks where it has it listed by fee.
He's got to be top
Nunes
10
Nunes is like top 6 or 7. Like,
jeez,
I think he's
is that bad?
No, sorry, no, he's 9. He's 9.
Right.
So yeah, he makes the top 10. But when you think like that's a 9th highest transfer fee for a player who probably played like a couple of 100 minutes last season in the Premier League, like it's just a very it's not Matheus Nunes' fault. The reasons why it's a bad signing are because of the amount of money that we've paid and the fact that for whatever reason Pep decided that he didn't want to use him much at all last season, despite having years earlier said that he's one of the best in the world in his position at what he does. So yeah, again, another one that on paper, even though it was a bit of a panic buy, because of those comments Pep made about him, looked like, oh well, this could work, this could be fine. But he's turned out to be a decent utility player this year. I mean, at one point at the start of the season when he was playing left back, he was literally our most creative player, almost just by default. But I just can't get over that transfer fee and sort of the manner in which the transfer was made. So for me, that is only just the third worst for me.
Interesting. It's difficult. I can't argue with the points made at all because it clearly, whatever it was meant to be, hasn't worked. However, if I'm in Núñez's corner, I'm making the argument that there has been something salvageable. And it'll be interesting to see next season, because personally speaking, I don't think City can afford to... Well, they obviously can't afford to get a smaller squad. Guardiola has spoken about this once or twice. I think the quote was after the weekend, he's not sure yet if he wants, a bigger squad or not for next season. But I think if you're looking at the players who might have to go out of the club, I would suggest maybe Núñez isn't towards the top of that priority list.
He's not a priority.
He maybe does a squad role for another year, another 2 years, possibly. Yeah. I don't know. I would make the case for number 3, a certain Nolito.
Yes, well, he's next. He's next on my list.
He's next, is he? Yeah, okay, so cool. So we're in a similar ballpark there. To be fair, I think bottom 5 for Núñez is probably fair. But if you're thinking about bad signings, Nolito coming in, looking almost sort of City level to begin with in 5 matches, headbutting a Bournemouth player, getting sent off.
I forgot all about that.
And I will have to check it quick time. But if you told me that he scored fewer goals in the remaining 30 matches of the season than he did in his first 5, I genuinely wouldn't be surprised. I've got a transfer market here.
That is very possible, because he scored. I'm sure he scored a hat-trick fairly early on, didn't he?
Was it in the game? I'm sure it was the game he got sent off. No. That was Sterling hat-trick, I think it was. So he got 2 against Stoke, and he got 1 against Celtic, and 1 against Steaua Bucharest. He then scored 2 more times between getting sent off against Bournemouth, which was match day 5 of the Premier League, and leaving City.
And the rest. Oh my God.
Yeah.
That is bad.
So,
yeah. I mean, that's like Turbo Negredo, that in it. That's like you've had a decent start, and then you've just gone one incident, and then your season's done from that point on. I think as well, it didn't help that he, at that start point, it felt like Pep had obviously just done what a lot of new managers would do, and just thought, he's a guy who I know from this league that I've played, from a league that I've managed. I think he was a player that he'd worked with at Barcelona B. I think
possibly
he had worked with him in the past. So it was like, look, he's someone who's going to roughly understand my system, who I can bring in, short-term fix, and then we can he can play ahead, while Leroy Sané, the sort of the young superstar we've signed, can slowly ease his way in across the course of the season. All good. And then, it came out pretty quickly that Nolito just did not enjoy life in Manchester at all, and that he just he had no interest in. I think as soon as he left, he was very quick to sort of say, I fucking hate Manchester, like the weather's awful and stuff like that. Look, Manchester is a city that,
it's got an acquired taste.
And I've always thought that it is every credit to whatever staff that Manchester City have got in the sort of player liaison side of things, that we've had so many players from countries far more beautiful, far more, with a far better climate, far more warm, exotic, who've come to Manchester City and stayed there for a good number of years.
Sergio Aguero doing, what was it, 9 years in the end? 10 years in the end. How?
Real Madrid had a blank check ready for him every year for like 5 years if the media was to be believed, and he still thought, you know what, Manchester's the place for me. I just think that it's one of those signings where, look, it wasn't a huge transfer fee, but I think in terms of like the actual what he gave us on the pitch, 1 season, and it wasn't even 1 season where he was good. It was just like 1 season where he was decent for a short spell.
Well, in fairness, it wasn't even a season. He played 1 minute between the 15th of April and the final game of the season.
Oh my God!
Against Watford, and he wasn't even in the squad towards the end of the season. So I'm happy to chuck Nolito. We can maybe do some sort of rearranging about, because if Núñez is going in there, I believe that leaves us with 1 position. And you and I were speaking beforehand about, because we were going to do a top 10. And thinking maybe that's sort of a bit harsh, and possibly when you get towards like 8, 9, 10, it is. But I reckon there's a case for 2 or 3 players maybe.
There's a couple of people who could get this spot.
Who have you gone for?
So I've gone for. We're really going to annoy a lot of Americans today. I've gone for Zach Steffen.
I think that's fair.
I just think as a backup, we've seen, and maybe we're just blessed with Ortega at the moment, and maybe I'm just like reassessing what I expect from backup keepers based on what Ortega's giving us. But Ortega, for the last couple of years, has pushed. Obviously, this season's a bit different for reasons like, you know, Edison wanted to leave in the summer. Maybe that's a factor as why his performances have dropped off a cliff. But the couple of years prior to that, Edison's game genuinely went up a level because a serious backup goalkeeper was there and someone who could conceivably have taken his spot. We saw in the cup games when Ortega was playing as well as he was, that meant that Edison knew when it was league games time, he had to step it up. Otherwise, there's a guy who's very good at shot stopping who's ready to take his place. Zach Steffen, I'm pretty sure Edison never once felt any sort of discomfort over his position in the squad.
Probably the opposite.
And yeah, it's. I think I remember maybe 2 outstanding saves that Zach Steffen made, and other than that, a lot of the goals that he conceded in those cup games were ropey. I think.
Do you remember the Liverpool semi?
Oh yeah, that was bad.
I think, was it 3? Did it end 3-2 in the end? I seem to believe we kind of.
We made it look like a much more salvageable scoreline.
But it was 3-0 down at half time, and Zach Steffen. Because was it a week before? We just played Liverpool in what was being dubbed the title decider anyway. It didn't end up to be the title decider, but it's that infamous sort of Edison doing the sort of Cruyff turn on his line and the ball sort of trickling across the goal line. Did Steffen try something similar to that? And I think it just failed big time. I seem to remember an absolute howler where he's kind of booted it against Mane or something.
There was. Did we play? He wasn't great. Was it Southampton we played against in a cup game as well, where he had a real shocker for one of the goals that we conceded?
Possibly.
I distinctly remember that was a game where he played. I could have the team wrong, but yeah. Point being, he was an awful backup goalkeeper. Maybe it's harsh to call a backup keeper top 5 worst signings that we've made, but I just think that given the position given that the point of that position is, I mean, even Claudio Bravo when he moved, I didn't put him in here because as a backup goalkeeper,
I was going to mention
he was very good. I mean, obviously, like for the job that he was supposed to do in that first season, absolutely terrible, like an unbelievably bad goalkeeper. But he redeemed himself in the cups in the following years that made me think, you know what, maybe Claudio Bravo is actually a fine player to have in the squad. Whereas I never felt that way about Zach Steffen once, and that's and whilst you can say for Nunez and Calvin Phillips that it is not their fault that their transfer fees are what they are. This is very much Zach Steffen's fault. Like he could have. It's just a case of he isn't good enough for Manchester City, and that's just the long and short of it. So he rounded out my top 5, but I'm pretty sure there's another couple of honourable mentions that you could pick out for contenders for that 5th spot.
Bravo was the one on my lips, and I think I agree with you. I think Steffen takes the last spot, but I do. When you consider what they were signed to do, and you maybe say Zach Steffen wasn't signed to be a good number 1 goalkeeper, Claudio Bravo absolutely was. And the fact that a season later or a summer later, City then went out and spent another 40 million quid on a goalkeeper. Well, I don't think Claudio Bravo was a stopgap. No, at least not a 1-season stopgap.
No. Well, if you consider that in that season, I mean, Caballero was starting against Monaco in the Champions League. Like Caballero ended up Caballero, a goalkeeper who could not kick it for love nor money, was brought into the squad to replace Claudio Bravo. Like it's
after Joe Hart that was just shows
as well. Yeah, this is what was so frustrating about it. Where it's like, obviously, if Joe Hart had and look, Joe Hart's got. I think he's comfortable with the decision that he made in the end. I don't think he should be. I think it was a decision where if he'd have stayed and maybe put his ego aside for a minute and accepted that the greatest manager in the world might have more to say about your style of goalkeeping than you do necessarily. I would say that if he'd have stayed and just sort of even just thought, you know what, I'm backed himself to be better than Claudio Bravo. Then he could have. Who knows what? It could have been him who was playing in those Champions League games later in the season when Bravo was clearly not up to scratch when it came to the shot stopping side.
I think the pressure would have been big because there was a spell of like 12 shots on target, something that Bravo just didn't save, and they all led to goals. I think at that point, if Joe Hart's looking over your shoulder, the pressure is certainly
exactly.
The fact
that Bravo, the fact that it got to the point for Pep where Bravo had to come in. Like, could you imagine if it had already been at that point? Plus, all the fans are saying, "Mate, Joe Hart's right there. Like, what are you doing?" Like, if there's one thing Joe Hart can do, it's shot stopping, and you've got him sat there on the bench while this.
Unless
this
it's down on the left hand side. Like, to be fair,
yeah. Oh god, yeah. Joe Hart's bottom left. Yeah, that was always the thing, wasn't it? Yeah, I actually can't think of anyone else who kind of stands out as a.
I've got, not that I would have them necessarily in the bottom 5, but Angelino, another kind of
a weird one where he just sort of got re-signed for just because we needed a left back, like, and just he never
refused to use. Apart from Liverpool and United, two of City's hardest and most sort of furious games of the season. I'm just having a quick look.
The only other one that I could think of, Sergio Gomez was the only other one I remotely considered.
It's very like even Angelino coded at the same time, isn't it?
Yeah, and also he did have a very, we'll always have that 6-3 against United, won't we? Where he was unbelievable. So, fair enough. And also signed for what, 10 million from Anderlecht, and we sold him for basically the same, if not a little bit more.
Pretty much the same. People have said Cancelo, which I'm not sure I can buy. I can see why, but I'm not sure I can buy it.
Yeah, I can understand the argument from like what he from obliterating the dressing room point of view that he sort of attempted to do on his way out. But I just think that he was a player that we signed for, what was it? It's always down as like 60 odd million in it, but it was basically Danilo plus 20, 30 million or whatever it was. For someone who we brought in for that much, who was, everyone forgets that's the season
team of the year 2 seasons in a row.
Yeah, the season before he eventually got sold, he was unbelievable. He was like, I've always thought, and I probably still would say this, to be honest, Cancelo is the most technically complete fullback in football. I think maybe Guardiola is like on getting towards that level, I think, but Cancelo could do literally everything, mostly with both feet. He's just like, he was a good attacker, defending maybe not so much, but in terms of like with the ball at his feet, like Cancelo was just like on another level, and for exactly what like Pep wants from his fullbacks. Obviously with the exception of like the Kyle Walker need for a pure athleticism going the other way to stop counterattacks. Like Cancelo, for that bit where he was doing the inverted sort of, he was inverting almost into an 8. Like, we'd obviously seen Stones and Lewis come in and do it in at the 6 coming into there, but Cancelo was doing this and then standing on the edge of the opposition's penalty area, which was like something we weren't seeing up at any of the point, because obviously he was such a good like goal threat, and also someone who could do those crosses from that sort of like deep outside the area position. He was great. He was a brilliant footballer. It's just a shame that his attitude, as it has been throughout his entire career, like take one look at his Wikipedia page and you'll notice something, that all these massive clubs have decided to get rid of him. I think if he just took that away, then Cancelo would be nowhere near the bottom 5. But I can understand why, because of how he did leave. Some people might be convinced to maybe put him there.
Yeah, I think that's that. No one else I can see. Jack Grealish, bottom 5.
Now, Jeremy Doku, on the other hand. No, we're not doing this. We're not doing that in this podcast.
That's all, folks. That was the first part of the show. If you want more, make sure to check the City Ramble wherever you get your podcasts from.